Hey, I'm Rob Scott, and I'm going to be talking today about extending the Kubernetes API with a custom Go operator. So your first question is probably, why would you extend the Kubernetes API? And, well, that's a very valid question. So let's take a step back and think about what Kubernetes is at a base level. And from my perspective, it can be summarized as something that transforms a desired state into reality. And admittedly, that's pretty broad, and a lot of software falls into that category. But Kubernetes has a lot of really nice features on top of that, and it has the nice advantage of being very easy to extend and customize. So let's take a look at a very traditional Kubernetes workflow. So one of the most common resources you're going to see in Kubernetes is a deployment. And in this case, we're going to deploy 3 Nginx containers with the latest Nginx version. Very straightforward. You've got 3 replicas. It's a deployment. It just works. If one of those containers crashes, it's going to get restarted. If you change the replica number to, say, 5 and apply that, you're going to get 5 replicas. It just kind of works. And it's really nice, and that's why we like working with Kubernetes. But this is not extending Kubernetes. This is not customizing Kubernetes. So more recently, there's this concept that is amazing called operators and custom resources. And this allows you to just build incredible things on top of Kubernetes. And one of my favorite examples of this is MySQL. There's tons of operators out there, but MySQL I thought was a novel example. So in this case, if you have a MySQL operator deployed in your cluster, with a simple spec like this, you can deploy a MySQL cluster using the MySQL operator. So the MySQL operator is listening for this YAML, and will take this YAML and transform it into a MySQL cluster with 3 members. Quite possibly the easiest way to provision MySQL ever. So I realize this is not KubeCon, we're at GopherCon, so I'll try and tie this back into Go and how this is all related to Go. Well, first off, Kubernetes itself is written in Go, and because of that, the best client lib is also in Go, and because of that, the best testing experience is also in Go. And some of you may have heard of Operator SDK and KubeBuilder, and these are awesome Go libraries that make it really straightforward to build your own custom Kubernetes operators. So I wanted to take a little bit of time to look at an example of an operator that we built. And we use KubeBuilder for this, actually. At ReactiveOps, we deal with a lot of clusters and a lot of organizations. And one of the things you notice in Kubernetes pretty quickly is it's hard to manage authorization. It's really hard to make that scale. Especially when you're managing it across lots of organizations, it's a very consistent trend. So to try and understand what's happening here, let's look at some sample configuration. So in this case, we've got a very simple example. We've got Jane, who should have full admin access across everything, and we've got Joe, who should be able to edit the web namespace and view the API namespace. And even this simple example turns into, well, a lot of YAML. So we need a cluster role binding for Jane. This gives her full access. And then we need a role binding for Joe to give him access to web, and another role binding for Joe to give him access to API. Now this is 2 users and a very simple example. You can probably imagine how this is not going to scale well. But we'll go ahead and apply this, and pretty quickly you'll see everything works and they have the access they need. Now if we look at this with our new operator, RBAC manager, we have a custom resource that cuts what was 3 slides full of YAML into a single slide full of YAML. So more concise. And if we apply this, we've got the logs from our operator below, and we get all the same resources. It just works. But let's take this a little bit further and see what happens when we try and change a role. This is where you really start to get annoyed with the authorization system as it exists in Kubernetes. So in this case, Joe no longer is good with just view access to the API. He needs to make a change. So we're just going to change view to edit, and we'll apply this change. As you'd expect, this is just how you work with Kubernetes. But as you might expect, when you actually go ahead and apply this, it does not work the way you want it to. You can't actually change that attribute at all. And that gets really annoying and really difficult to automate. The best way to deal with this is to actually delete the existing role binding and create another one, which gets pretty cumbersome. So with RBAC Manager, we tried to fix this, and so you make the same change here from view to edit, and you go ahead and you apply the same change, and what do you know? RBAC Manager does the annoying work for you, the cumbersome bit of deleting and creating a role binding, and it just kind of works. So in a brief conclusion here are some benefits of RBAC Manager for authorization in Kubernetes. One, it gets you really concise configuration, cuts your configuration down to at least a third, and increasingly more as you scale out. And then it gives you a really easy to read overview of authorization in your cluster. And finally, you can have roles that are easy to update. And maybe most importantly, you can enable automation. There's a lot more with RBAC Manager that enables automation, but this is a lightning talk and I can't cover everything. But the goal here is to be able to manage authorization in an automated way like you would everything else. So in my mind, I really love operators. I hope this has been inspirational, and hopefully some of you want to try this out and build your own operator. They're really cool. There's a ton of potential. This does not have to be limited to Kubernetes resources. You can provision things outside of the cluster if you're interested. It's an interesting way to deploy custom apps, custom environments. There's a lot of really cool potential here. And if you're interested in RBAC Manager specifically, reactiveops/RBAC Manager. And you can find me on GopherCon Slack or Gopher Slack or Twitter at Robert J. Scott. Thanks so much.